Far more than we think. Making Sense of Spirituality by Angelo. Chapter 7. Perception is Reality. As we've seen, the ego reinforces its sense of self through its own experience. Actually, what we experience on a daily basis is our own perception of what seems to be happening. Our perception instantly combines sensory input with our own unique interpretation. This understanding is a crucial step towards moving just slightly away from our own thinking. It takes us just far enough away so we can see what is really going on. It is our perception that creates our personal reality. The way we perceive an event will almost certainly be different from how somebody else sees it. Our assumption is that everyone else sees things exactly as we do. But we know this is not the case because differences in perception happen to us every day. Misunderstandings, miscommunications, false conclusions, and differing views of the same thing are continual features of our daily lives. Yet we often insist that we are right, and it's a constant source of frustration and annoyance that others cannot see things from our perspective. It's been a humbling experience to realize that I'm not always right. In fact, it turns out that I've been mistaken about quite a lot of things for quite some time. It's quite probable the things that I now believe to be right are misconceptions. But like all things in life, spirituality is a matter of perception. But as I said at the beginning of the book, I'm not claiming to be totally right about any of these spiritual ideas. What I can say with absolute conviction is that spirituality now makes sense to me, and it has had a profoundly positive impact on my experiences. This issue of perception is far more important than we may have previously thought, so it's worth exploring in depth. The classic example of differences in perception is the scenario of the glass half filled with water. The optimist sees it as half full, and the pessimist sees it as half empty. They both believe they are right. In fact, they both know they are right, and that the other person is wrong. They may acknowledge that the other has a different view, but that will not change their own view. They can agree to disagree agreeably, but their opposing views remain the same. Interestingly, I was discussing this very point recently with a young lady named Olivia, who's aged 11 and blessed with the fresh perspective of youth. She pointed out that the glass is actually full, with the contents being half water and half air. So now we have three completely different perceptions of exactly the same thing: the optimist, the pessimist, and the realist. There's a lot going on behind the scenes here, which at first glance doesn't seem to be very important. People are entitled to have different points of view, and the world would be very boring if we all thought exactly the same. What is interesting and instructive, though, is the underlying cause of the differences. As the title of this chapter suggests, our individual perception is our unique reality. The people looking at the glass of water do not only perceive it differently, but actually experience their individual perception as real. It is their reality. What they see is real to them. Until Olivia pointed out that there was air in the glass as well as water, it had not even occurred to me. Before that moment, the glass was half full, as I am ever the optimist, but now it will be forever completely full, unless of course yet more is revealed, in which case my reality may change yet again. We seem to fiercely hold onto our own thoughts and feelings, but will then replace them in an instant if something else happens which causes us to change our mind. One of the many benefits of spirituality is this recognition that our thoughts and feelings are temporary and do not define us. We can choose to change them if we wish. We can look at things from a different perspective, and this can, and often does, change our experience of any given situation. To move from a narrow and habitual point of view to being more broad-minded is not always easy, but it is the first step in letting go of our ego. But how do we do that? Well, the best way is to try and understand the cycle of the mind, and we can then hopefully see how change can take place. In order to explain my basic understanding of how the mind reinforces itself, I'm going to use a simple everyday example. Imagine you are walking down a busy street and you see a friend walking towards you. As you approach each other, you smile and attempt to make eye contact, but the other person just walks straight by and does not acknowledge you in any way. Make a mental note now about the first thought that came into your mind as you heard that last sentence. Be honest with yourself. There's no right or wrong answer, but you probably have some thought about it. The first step in understanding the cycle of the mind is to consider the idea that there are up to 4 levels of truth in any given situation. These can be labelled as the imagined truth, the apparent truth, the actual truth, and the underlying truth. Each successive one becomes deeper and more meaningful. The imagined truth will be a version of events that we construct in our own minds based on our previous experiences and the resulting knowledge that we have stored. The apparent truth will be a non-judgmental observation of what really happened. The actual truth will include some understanding of why such a thing happened. And the underlying truth will encompass a full understanding of the circumstances that led to a particular event occurring. Whichever level of truth we hold will directly influence how we think about any situation or event. So let's now apply these 4 levels of truth to our example. The imagined truth may be that the other person saw us and deliberately blanked us for some reason. The apparent truth is simply that the other person did not acknowledge us. The actual truth is that the other person didn't see us. The underlying truth could be that the other person had just received some very bad news and was in a total daze and not focusing on anything. Hopefully you can already see that this example has the potential to create differing experiences. I would nevertheless like to go through it painstakingly because there is a great deal more to consider. Let's look at the imagined truth first. As mentioned above, the imagined truth will be the net result of our previous experiences and accumulated knowledge. Our heads are full of our own interpretations of everything that has ever happened to us, together with everything that we've ever been taught or have come to believe. This vast database of so-called fact will have been heavily influenced by childhood experiences, parenting style, home life, school life, religious or other communities, teenage adventures, relationships, adult life, advertising, reaction to news and other media, and more or less everything and anything else that you can possibly think of. A huge jumble of mixed messages and confused reality that is totally unique to each and every one of us. So our imagined truth has the potential to be pretty wild, and indeed it often is. Our ability to judge or interpret any situation has a huge variety of possibilities because each of us is unique. In our example, it could be that we have a history of difficult relationships with people who are close to us. Perhaps we had fallen out with our friend recently and hadn't spoken to them since. In this scenario, we would naturally think that the other person had indeed blanked us and was making a point. This obviously has implications for the resulting thoughts. This type of imagined truth is the one many of us use almost all of the time, although we are probably reluctant to admit it. It happens in an instant and often remains unchallenged. The apparent truth is what any independent observer would report as an accurate record of what really happened. It's factual and without any opinion, embellishment, or any other distortion. The truth will be somewhat easier for us to accept if only we could set aside our judgment. In our example, the apparent truth is that two people passed each other on the street, with one attempting to make eye contact and the other not responding. It's simple and straightforward, with no judgment involved. What's interesting here is how infrequently we think in this non-judgmental way, and how much more serene our lives would be if we did. It makes us more open to accept things as they are. I'm sure you can see the different thoughts that arise when armed with the apparent truth rather than the imagined truth of the encounter on the street. It at least allows the concept of the benefit of doubt. Moving now to the actual truth, we see with more clarity what really happened and why. Things tend to happen for a reason, and even if we don't fully understand the circumstances behind it, we can at least see and accept that the reason caused the thing to happen. In our example, the actual truth was that our friend simply did not see us. There's no doubt at all, and this makes it even easier for us to accept. It also makes it possible for us to forgive the other person. If only we could accept the notion that everything happens in the world for a reason, we would find it much easier to be at peace. Forgiveness would be second nature. Actually, it turns out that everything does happen for a reason, although the reasons are almost certainly not the ones we may at first think. Finally, we have the underlying truth. This, if you like, is the ultimate understanding of any given circumstance. This comprehension may be beyond us most of the time, but if we're able to ascertain it, it makes acceptance of any situation automatic and may even provoke a totally different set of thoughts. In our example, we now know that our friend had just ended a phone call during which he was told that his father had been taken ill and was being rushed to hospital. Our friend was in shock and in a state of panic and fear. He was walking blindly down the street, not knowing what to do next. Well, furnished with this new information, we completely understand why he didn't see us or acknowledge us. It all makes sense now. There's no longer even the need to forgive him, because clearly what happened was completely reasonable. So here we have a simple example of an event that produces a whole range of differing thoughts, depending on which level of truth we are holding at the time it happens. Awareness of these different truths allows us to be open to having different thoughts. This is not the end of the story though, because our thoughts instantly create an emotional reaction. Our thoughts drive our emotions. This is another new concept that took me a while to grasp. I used to believe strongly that I was a victim of my emotions, but now I'm aware that my thoughts actually create my emotions. Let's again use our example to illustrate how powerfully this works. Our imagined truth that we were blanked by our friend brings up negative emotions. For example, we might think, "How dare he do this to me? What childish behaviour! I can't believe he did that. What a way to be treated after all I've done for him." Our emotional reaction will vary depending on the nature of our thoughts, but it could range from hurt, annoyance, frustration, indignation, or anger to feelings of retaliation and revenge. We may also feel embarrassed that someone may have seen us being blanked and will have judged us in some negative way. These emotions may then lead us to take any number of actions, either to get our own back or to change the way we feel. In any event, we're likely to regret our thoughts and actions at some future point. We will also add this new experience to our database of hurts, and this will then impact our future feelings and behaviours. This is all very unfortunate, but you can see how easily it could happen. Our imagined truths create negative thoughts. Negative thoughts drive unpleasant emotions. Unpleasant emotions generally lead to harmful behaviour. And harmful behaviour adds to our database of bad experience. And in bad experiences give us more ammunition for future imagined truths and negative thoughts. But the cycle can work positively for us too when things go well. But the ego is fearful and defensive, and we generally tend to think negatively. And this type of thinking goes on relentlessly. It's not good for us at all, yet we keep doing it over and over again. Moving on to the emotions arising from the apparent truth, we see straight away that these will be far less negative. The friend did not acknowledge us in the street, but we're not sure whether he saw us. If he didn't see us, then obviously there's nothing to worry about. If he did see us, then there may be all sorts of reasons why he chose not to acknowledge us. There's no need for us to automatically assume the worst. We can give him the benefit of the doubt and accept the situation for what it is. Seeing him may remind us that we have an outstanding issue to resolve, and this may give rise to some negative emotions, but generally our emotions arising from the apparent truth are fairly neutral. We don't jump to conclusions or judge in any way. We just accept things as they are. Introducing the actual truth makes things even easier to cope with. Our thoughts are now perfectly accepting because we know he didn't see us, and we have no need to be offended. Forgiveness comes easily. We might wonder why he was so preoccupied, and it may remind us to give him a call later and touch base. Our emotional reaction to the encounter on the street is neutral to positive. Judgments, conclusions, and negative thoughts and emotions are not needed or relevant because we know for sure what happened. The case is closed and there's no need to think about it anymore. Even if we know the actual truth, there's nearly always a deeper underlying truth that may well further change our emotions if only we were aware of it. Seeking a deeper truth is something that we rarely do in our lives because we're generally content with our imagined or actual truths. Even if the apparent truth becomes clear, we rarely feel the need to go any further. It takes time and effort to seek deeper understanding, and we're often too busy to give it enough attention. Our example is a simple one, yet clearly, had we known that our friend had just received a distressing phone call, the chances are that our emotional reaction would be one of concern, kindness and compassion. Our reaction probably would have been one of love, and we would have wanted to offer help and support. We would now have a positive emotional reaction to exactly the same event. This underlying truth was not visible in our example, but it existed nevertheless. This may seem ridiculously naive, but if everyone knew the underlying truth about everyone else, it seems logical that there would be far more love and tolerance in the world. Well, we can't change the world, of course, but we can change how we react to it. We don't need to know the underlying truth about everything that happens, but a simple awareness that such a truth exists can lead us to more acceptance and peace of mind. I suggested earlier that you make a mental note of your initial thoughts when you first heard that example. Hopefully the subsequent analysis will have added to your thinking and highlighted how wildly our thoughts and emotions can differ depending on which truth we hold. So this business of reality turns out to be far more subtle than it first appeared. What we find is that our own thinking creates our reality. This is a fundamental point to grasp. Our thinking creates our reality. I'm not necessarily saying that we create the events in our lives, but I am saying the way we think about any person, place, thing or event will directly create our experience and hence our reality. The example above brings some understanding as to what's going on in the mind. The cycle is clear. The truth that we hold about any particular circumstance drives our thinking, which in turn drives our emotions and our experience and our reality. Our experience of reality then informs our database of knowledge, and the cycle is complete. The cycle continually feeds our own sense of reality, and this then reinforces our ego. Nothing can change until we become aware of how it all works. Once we are aware, change can begin to take place. So, if the problem is our thinking, how do we go about changing it? It's tempting to think that, in computing terms, this feels like a major rewrite of the operating system. And that doesn't seem like an attractive idea, because we become very attached to our thinking, even if we know that it sometimes lets us down. Well, that was my understandable reaction too, but I have gradually mellowed and become more willing. I knew that my thinking was the problem, but I had no clear idea of what direction it should now take. I could not accept all of this spiritual mumbo-jumbo nonsense as the solution. Spirituality was too far-fetched and was grounded in the timeless need for humankind to look to the heavens to find a reason for our existence. Instead of taking responsibility for ourselves, we looked elsewhere for someone or something to worship or blame. The key concepts of spirituality were the opposite of the doctrine of self-sufficiency, willpower, and achievement that had been drummed into me as I grew up. Added to this was the fact that the world was clearly not operating on a spiritual basis. It was dog eat dog out there, and I couldn't see how being spiritual was going to help me in any way. It made no sense. But then the penny dropped. If our thinking is driven by the truths we hold, then our truths hold the key to breaking the cycle. Our truths arise from our perception of the world. We see the world through our own particular filters, and these filters represent our perception. In order to change what we see, we simply have to change our filters. The next step is to realize that our perception depends crucially on our perspective. Let's use a tapestry as an example. The farther back from the tapestry we go, the more sense the individual threads make. When we are up close, our view of the threads can be confusing, but with a broader perspective, our perception changes to something completely different. We now see the bigger picture. We all know the saying about not seeing the wood for the trees. We will never see the beauty of the woods if we don't allow ourselves a more distant view. If we broaden our perspective, we will inevitably see things differently. Our perceptions will change, and this will lead to different truths. In summary, the broader our perspective, the deeper our truths become. And perspective is a matter of awareness and choice. Firstly, we have to be aware that it is possible to take a broader perspective, and secondly, we have to choose to do so. Standing with our noses up against the tapestry, we first have to discover that we could take a step back if we wanted to, and then we have to be willing to actually do it. We may do this either because we find the current perspective intolerable or uncomfortable, or because we're interested and curious to know what the bigger picture looks like. This is a matter of personal choice, but at least we are now aware that we have such a choice. We don't need anything extra or supernatural in order to become more aware. We already have everything we need to take a step back and see ourselves for who we really are. We are body, mind, and spirit. All we need to do is to choose to step back, and it will quickly become clear. Once we become conscious of our spiritual selves, everything changes. Perception changes, thinking changes, emotions become more positive, life takes on new meaning, and things start to get better and better. Once we see this, we instantly have a much larger cycle to work within. The circular cycle of the mind is now as follows. Being conscious of spirit increases our awareness. Increased awareness broadens our perspective. A broader perspective changes our perception. A different perception inevitably deepens our truths. Deeper truths cause our thinking to become more balanced. Balanced thinking brings about more positive emotions, and more positive emotions produce increasingly enjoyable experiences. And enjoyable experiences add to our appreciation of life and our gratitude, and this further informs our awareness and perspective. So this expanded cycle of the mind reinforces itself in a positive way and, in my experience, quickly becomes an upward spiral of spiritual growth. Our thinking changes without effort, as if by magic, and consequently our experience of life improves. Perception really is reality. Whatever our particular circumstances may be, it's we who create our own experience of life. The great news is that with this awareness, we now get to choose which version of reality we want for ourselves.